when I first started pursuing a career in writing in earnest, just right around when I was in college. So I guess maybe pursuing a career isn't the right phrase, but thinking that I maybe would want to write professionally someday. It was right around the early 2000s, and obviously like YouTube and videos and stuff. Like there just wasn't this abundance of content where you could connect with and learn from other writers. It was largely just going to the bookstore and finding copies of like the Paris Review or whatever that had author interviews, most of whom were really huge names. So even to sort of think about your own self and your own career in like that context was kind of weird. You're like reading and you're like, yeah, what if I could create a career that's kind of like James Salter's or something. But so it's just great that you're doing this, because this is a nice resource, and I wish there had been stuff like this when I was first starting, where I could just listen to writers riff about the journey and stuff. So
well, thank you. I appreciate that, but I think you should hold your praise. I feel like it's a little bit premature until you actually see the end result of these.
Well, it's you got to humble beginnings, right?
I think I had a proclivity for the startup mentality because I always was impatient, and over the past few years I've just realized, man, things take a lot of time. They take a lot longer than you expect.
They do. It's especially true with, that's a hard realization with writing too. And this is kind of probably gets into other topics about putting together long, books and stuff like that. But it just takes a long time, and there aren't any shortcuts really. And I find that especially when writers and myself, first and foremost, when we're first starting out, I think it's natural to just kind of like look for shortcuts and look for ways that you can make it the easiest way, the quickest way to publish a book and all that. And it's like, at the end of the day, not just with writing, but with anything, it's a learned craft, and it takes a long time to do it, and an even longer time to get really, good at it, which is not something I would not put myself in that category. I would put myself in that, still pursuing that. But it just takes a long time, and that's tough, because I feel like being patient is one of kind of the hardest things.
What was the switch? When did you decide, or what struck you that you said, writing, that's what I want to do?
Well, let's see. I was always writing, so there was never a switch where I was like, I want to be a writer. I was just always writing, but I was always interested as well in film and television and radio and all of that. And when I was in high school, I didn't take any creative writing class. All the writing in school up to college was writing research papers, basically.
Oh, wow.
So I don't want to say I didn't know that creative writing was like an avenue, because I'm sure I kind of did, but I just thought like a lot of the writing that you do is research papers and nonfiction type of stuff. So I got to college, and I kind of focused on my interest in various media, and thinking about maybe I would want to write for television, or write screenplays for movies, or write, I like write for not write for a radio station, but maybe work at a radio station. And I kind of worked for a college station, and there's some writing components that you can do if you're involved in a radio station and stuff. So that's kind of what I focused on. And then when I was in college, just whenever I would have like a free class on my schedule, I started taking creative writing classes.
Oh, okay.
For fun, really. And my initial love was poetry, actually. And
I haven't found any of yours online. Is that on purpose?
I didn't publish. No, I didn't really publish. I think I published some things in the college literary journal, but nothing beyond that. But I very quickly turned to. I very quickly fell in love with short stories, because in most intro to creative writing classes, you would have like a unit on poetry, and then you would have a unit on short stories. And so I don't know, just over time became more and more captivated with short stories, and I just like the brevity of them, and so that's kind of how the shift happened. And then when I graduated from college, um, I mean, I was just kind of like your typical didn't know what I want. I wanted to write. I loved writing. That was really the only thing in my life that I loved to do, was to write. And I didn't know how I was going to apply that into any sort of career. I don't even know if I was thinking necessarily in terms of a career when I was 21 years old. So I ended up just kind of roaming around for a year and going to various and climbing a lot, going to like all sorts of climbing gyms. And I actually had a plan to, with a buddy of mine, we were thinking we would do this cool outdoor adventure where we would canoe from Minnesota to Hudson Bay, basically. So basically all the way to Canada.
Interesting.
And it's like it's a long trip. It would take like the whole summer to do, and certainly like probably a year to plan it.
Well, you did do it because you haven't written about it.
Right. We did not end up doing it. It kind of just fizzled. There were a couple of just things that it just timing wise, it didn't work out. And then there were some issues we were wondering if he'd be able to get into Canada because he had a drunk driving type thing. Sure. Which, and I don't know if anybody listening knows, but like Canada can be really, really strict about any I don't know what you'd call it, criminal record or something, on it can be hard to get in. So that was kind of what I had really hyped myself for. And then when that fell through, I was just kind of like, well, what could I do? I guess I could apply for MFAs in creative writing, which I thought it was something I could do eventually anyway, but that it just kind of got expedited because I didn't really have anything else going on. And so I applied and you kind of apply to many different places and you go where you get into. That's true for all sorts of graduate programs, not just creative writing. And so I got into NYU eventually, and I'd wanted to, living in New York City had been a dream of mine for a long time anyway, as a kid who grew up in the Midwest. It was just kind of, New York was sort of a mythical place, as it is for a lot of people that grow up in small town Midwest. And so I'd wanted to move there. And it just kind of worked out getting into the grad school. I flirted with the idea of just moving there anyway without anything going on. But then graduate school, getting into the graduate school there, it just kind of worked out perfectly that I could move to New York City, and I could also get the MFA. And so that's how it happened. Yeah.
Did it meet your expectations? Did you have expectations going into the program or moving to New York?
I did and I didn't, because like I had not been a creative writing major, as we talked about. So I had taken a couple of creative writing classes, but I didn't have certainly a lot of academic experience in creative writing courses, and not really with the workshop style format, which most graduate schools, that's how they run their creative writing programs. So I just didn't really have many expectations, because I didn't really know. I just didn't know what to expect. And I just wanted to write, and I figured I would go there and be around a lot of other writers. And so did it meet my expectations? I didn't have any, really. So it was a wonderful experience. I learned from I had some great instructors, and I had a wonderful group of friends there. I think, though, again, going back to what we were saying about wanting these quick fixes, it's hard to have patience. I think one of the things that maybe I was a little blinded to, and I think other people that go into graduate programs, especially for writing, probably are too, is you kind of expect that you'll go into it and like you'll just sort of be molded, and you'll come out of it as this fully formed writer with success and stuff like that. And of course, it's not like that at all. You go in with all the troubles that come with, all the anguish and challenges that come with being a writer, and you come out and you have those same challenges. I think there was one person in my MFA class, so to speak, who signed with an agent when she was actually in the program, and I think that's kind of the dream for everybody, right? Go into the program, and your professor will like read your stuff and say, "Oh my gosh, this is brilliant. Let me introduce you to like the agencies." doesn't really work out that way.
Is that
But
statistic common, like 1 out of however many?
I don't know. It definitely is not. It definitely is rare that it happens. Yeah, because I think just because graduate programs are so competitive and there are so many wonderful writers that tend to go to them, I just think it's rare that anybody. I think it's rare that it happens so quickly like that for anybody, because graduate program's only 2 years, and as you or anybody else knows, to get an agent or to get recognized by agencies can often take years and years of submitting and rejection and all that. What you find is the greatest thing that the graduate programs give you is it gives you time to write, really, because that's the thing, especially as an adult. It's so easy to talk yourself out of creating time to write because there's so many other things pulling at your life. I mean, when do you? It's hard to justify. Okay, I'm just going to take like 4 or 5 hours and just like do nothing, just sit at my desk and work on and write. But in graduate school, you can do that and you can sort of justify it because it's like, well, I'm in school. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. So that's the thing I learned when I was there. It wasn't necessarily what I expected when I went there. But
to clarify that statement, because I've been thinking a lot about that as well, the time versus, you could qualify it as like a time versus money equation. And I'm curious if what you mean is that you started to learn the value of defining time for yourself.
There's this thinking, I mean, if you're going to carve out time for your day rather than just sitting and writing, I think a lot of my mind would be like, well, I should be job searching. Like, that's really what I should be doing, right? Like, if I'm going to sit at my computer and chip away at something, it should be working on my resume. It should be trying to network with people. It should be searching job postings, because that's, and yet if you go to graduate school, it's easier to just kind of remind yourself, no, I'm here to do this. And like you said, you're sort of learning how to carve out that time for yourself where you can really do whatever you want, whether it's writing or something else,
What are you carving time out for now? Because you're quite busy. You're a coach, yeah. You climb as well. You're a writer for many publications. So do you have something where you're like, I need to make time for this?
Yeah, I think it's still, for me, it's still just, it's still writing, certainly. It's just the parts of, like, I'll have stuff that I'm working on that are for publications, if I have contracts and whatnot that I have to churn out certain articles. But then, for example, if I'm writing a book or something like that, I've never been in a situation where I've gotten any sort of book advance, or either money or contract or anything like that. It's always just been like, I'm going to work on this passion project book and I'll worry about how to get it published later. But since that's not something that I'm getting paid for per se, and I'm not on contract to do it,
okay.
I have to carve out time for that. It's like, I need to write something for Climbing Business Journal. I need to write something for Climbing Magazine. I need to write, if there are other things, Gym Climber Magazine or whatever. Yeah. But it's like, well, but I have to carve out a little time during the week to work on my book as well. So it's still going on, and it never ends for a writer. And I think as you get older and older, it only gets harder to carve out that time, of course, as you start to, if you get a family or if you get married, and then if you have kids, and then if your kids go to school, and it just mounts more and more. So
for sure.
So it's a skill that's it's really vital that writers fine tune that, and I feel like graduate school can be sort of an avenue for that for some people, and it was for me.
How do you? So the big challenge that I face in that regard is that I'm quite new to this, and so a lot of my thinking is around, well, how do I need to make money by getting stories. And so the way to get stories is by pitching ideas. So I have to find ideas, I have to research ideas, I have to do like pre-interviews, and then I have to craft the pitch and then send them out. And the lead time, oh my gosh, I had no idea how long it took in some cases.
Yeah.
I just got an article that is about 7 months in the making, which I think is a little bit longer than normal. But there's things like that where I'm like, well, I want to be able to create something like this interview, but maybe my time is better spent pitching. So how do you think about that? Do you grapple with that at all?
How do I what, explain it a little more? How do I grapple with just having long-term projects and kind of short-term projects? Is that what you're?
Sure, sure. I mean, are you still pitching consistently for like service pieces, or are you mostly doing features? I mean, you do have long-standing relationships with publications at this point. So are they coming to you with ideas, or what does that look like?
I think that if I'm thinking about it right now, I think this is a very unique time because of climbing's, and this is kind of dovetailing into the climbing discussion, but because of climbing's Olympic inclusion and the hype that's just leading up to that for the past probably 6 months, it's been a lot. In a lot of cases, it's been publications like contacting me, and
cool.
and I can't reveal who some of them are because the articles haven't come out yet, and
Sure.
they want them embargoed for whatever reason. But which is like not ever something I ever envisioned. Like some of these publications that wouldn't otherwise have any interest in climbing at all or any climbing coverage, certainly not about the comp scene, are just emailing me out of the blue and saying, we'd like to, we want to write a story about climbing. We think you're the guy to do it, which is very, of course, like that's extremely, I'm honored and flattered.
Well, it's also true. I mean, that is your niche.
Yeah, well, and I also keep in mind that it's only temporary, right? Because once the Olympics are over, it's almost like that that ship is going to sail at least until the next Olympics, and even then, it won't be like this is the only time that climbing is going to be firstly included in the Olympics for the first time ever, right? So, so this time it's a little weird in asking that question because I think this time is a little unique for me in that sense. But other than that, yeah, I mean, it's just an endless balancing, juggling act of pitching to places and dealing with rejection. And I'm a huge proponent of always having a lot of irons in the fire in that regard. Pitch to as many places as you can, and pitch, formulate story ideas in terms of how you can get the most bang for your buck. So, for example, if you are going to travel to, I don't know, let's say like San Francisco or something. You're going to travel to San Francisco to interview some climber that lives in San Francisco. Also think about, well, what are some other stories that I could write while I'm there, while I have the resources of that specific place? And let's pitch as many of those to different places as possible, as opposed to just kind of getting tunnel vision on one piece. In other words, see if you can like spread the love of the research a little bit, which gets a little harder admittedly with climbing stuff because climbing is such a specialized thing to write about. It's not like in a lot of times if you're traveling somewhere to interview somebody, you're not going to probably like New York City or something that has like a lot of other potential stories. You might be going to just I don't know, like some gym or something in the middle of, not in the middle of nowhere, but a gym that maybe there isn't as much interest in content, ancillary content. But yeah, it's a juggling act to your point.
Well, just to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
How much pre-research would you do to try to suss out additional stories for a travel piece like that? Or would you sort of see what you find on the ground?
I would do a significant amount of pre-research. I'm a big proponent in doing that in general because the more I write, the more I realize that research and preparation is everything. And that's not only true for these stories, it's true for a book you're writing or anything. If you try to do it when the moment is upon you, you're either not going to do a very good job or you're just going to things are going to slip through the cracks. So yeah, as much research as you can do beforehand, absolutely, 100%. And some people like that more than others. Some people love doing research. Some people, it's agonizing because you really do have your head in the computer or you're going to the library or whatever. But it's for the better in the end. It really is.
Yeah, what I'm finding now. So one of the stories mandates that I have 5 resources, and it's a profile of a person. So I'm talking with people in their life, parents, former partners, friends, etc. And it's amazing how the story can come out from the research and interviews. It's, oh my gosh, you would have no idea. You'd have no idea about these anecdotes or a certain family member and their history that had, you know, a prominent like political career or something like that. And you're like, wow, that's what's going to be the little nugget or detail that's going to bring like color to this.
But that's also where you're at sort of the precipice. If you find that there is really so much of that if it just keeps like swelling outward and outward, that's when you have to think like, well, maybe this should be a book, you know? And that's where you can kind of get the idea of maybe there's just too much to like include all this. Maybe there are too many nuggets, right? And it would be better served in some longer form thing. Obviously, you have to write the piece that you're contracted to write, but I also think that's how a lot of book ideas happen, right? It's just like you're digging into something for an article, and then you're just kind of like, oh, well, this could be flushed out a lot more. So,
well, this is probably information I shouldn't disclose, but contracts, like, oh my gosh, I got my first piece with a magazine that I've finalized basically, and they still haven't gotten a contract for that. Yeah. So that seems like a red flag. So I should probably follow up with them, huh?
I say contracts more figuratively than literally.
Okay.
I think I would not worry too much about that. I've had a number of magazines that that it's just sort of like handshake type agreement over email or whatever. Okay. And then the contract, you hope it comes eventually. I don't want to say I've been burned, because I find that the times when compensation doesn't come is usually with very small publications, literary journals and stuff like that. And I don't want to say burned, because I know a lot of them just don't have much money anyway. So especially if you're writing for a larger entity that has like a reputation and sort of a legacy or whatever, I wouldn't worry too much about it. They'll probably get your especially if it's a magazine that's owned by one of the big publishers like Hearst or Meredith or something like that. Like, they all have payroll departments, and at least when I was on staff at magazines, there was an employee. She would just literally, after an issue was published, she would go through page by page, looking at every single byline and looking at the payroll on her computer and making sure somebody got compensated or was going to get compensated for it. So it's also a balancing act, because nobody writes because they want to become a millionaire, right? Or at least
really?
The people like
Damn it.
Certainly the people that are writing about climbing, right?
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's a better distinction. Maybe if you're writing like pulp romance novels or something, I don't know. But so it's also kind of like you have to kind of reconcile that. Is it worth just pursuing the story anyway? And can you justify pursuing it even if you're not going to get compensated, substantially or whatever? And sometimes the answer is yes, frankly, if it's a cool story. So.
Yeah, the big question that I have, honestly, is like, is this a viable career? And it's something that I grapple with quite a bit. And I've actually recently decided that I'm going to commit 3 years to it. So I just finished year 1. And the reason why I'm doing that is just because, one, I feel like I need to commit to things longer term. This goes back to being patient. And 2, that just seems like a general time frame for like new businesses to be able to get to a level point. What I'm finding is that it's not the glory days of magazines or newspapers where you can get $2, $3, $6+ a word.
Yeah. And
it's fairly niche, this industry, as you know quite well. And yeah, I'm curious how other people are feeling, because I read a lot of other people's accounts online, and they're not throwing out numbers that they're getting from like feature stories that are overwhelming. So it seems like a career that you go into knowing you're going to struggle for like 10 years plus. And I guess I'm curious, like, you really have to be driven by writing and telling stories, which, like, I think about like, would I keep writing if I had a full-time job? And I would. But like, do you grapple with that, thinking through like, why am I doing this?
Yeah, I think it's a really like heavy question, because I think it's something that every writer sort of has to grapple with.
My
It's
next question will be lighter, if that helps.
No, that's great. This is a good question to talk about, because honestly, I find that it's something that it like doesn't get discussed as much as like the nuts and bolts of like, yeah, the industry, especially the climbing industry. It it just is not at the stage where it can sustain a lot of full-time writers or content creators in any form. Just it's just like you said, it's like just a small, it's just a relatively small industry. It's not like something like other sports like football or something where there's just like myriad reporters and stuff doing it full time. It's always a struggle for sure. And I try not to think about, is this something I could do long term? I just kind of, I'm just doing it. I don't want to say day by day, I guess, in terms of, I've never really thought about this, but I suppose the Olympics is kind of a line of demarcation for me.
Mm-hmm.
And once I get to that and that's finished with, then maybe I'll like sort of assess things. But it definitely is not an easy, it's definitely not easy, but it's like, if you make it this far, for anybody that's watching this, whatever degree of writer they are, or however they are in their career, if you've made it this far, you're probably doing it because you're pretty driven anyway. And so even if somebody tells you like it's not a viable career, I don't know if many people, if that would shut them down kind of full cloth right away.
Sure.
You know, I'm going to be writing even if it's not like a full-time career, because I was writing before it was a full-time career for me. You know, I was writing when I wasn't getting paid anything, and like your compensation is a complimentary copy of the literary journal or something like that, right? So
not even one to send to your family.
Yeah, just one. So I don't know if I think it's like, to me, it's like I'll just roll with it, whatever. If I have to get another job,
sure,
you know, I'll get another job eventually, which I'm, you know, and then I'll write, and I'll still be just as happy, because it's never a question for me, and I don't think it's ever a question for you, like, oh, am I gonna stop writing, right? Because like it wasn't a conscious choice for me to start writing. It was just something I always did from the time I was a kid, and so I don't know. It doesn't really stress me out as much as some other write. Obviously, paying bills is stressful. Like that element does. But in terms of like, oh, what'll happen if, you know, if you can't be sustained long term for the career? It's like, oh, well, I'll get another job and I'll still write, and I'll go back to what I was doing years ago, which was like working during the week and then writing on the weekends. You know, and we make it. Writers tend to make it work, whatever their situation is, right? Like whatever their scenario is, they'll find a way to write.
I mean, I agree. I mean, your mentality is certainly the more flexible one, because it allows you to be, you know, dynamic to the moment, you know, follow trends or not worry too much and get stuck in a mental rut.
Well, I think there are different ways that a writer has to judge success and fulfillment, and, you know, and being able to make a living is certainly one metric, and a very big one, and a very important one, but it's just one, and there are a lot of other ways, you know, that a writer should assess their career, because there are a lot of other markers and indicators, and there are a lot of other kind of milestones that you can hit that can encourage you to keep going, even if the milestone is not necessarily like, you know, $1,000 here for a book deal or whatever. So
yeah, well, because you were asking me like my story, and so maybe I'll just give a little bit of a look there, because I mean, honestly, when I've been thinking about this, the reason why I am pursuing writing is, one, I've wanted to do it for a while. Two, I really enjoy the process of figuring out what the story is and how to tell it and getting to know people, and I like the interviews quite a bit actually. Mm-hmm. But really, I mean, I want to be able to choose how I spend my time. And if I had the choice, I'd rather spend it writing. And for me, it's like a liberty or a freedom that of being able to even choose. Like first of all, it's a luxury. I'm quite lucky to be able to do this. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's about more than just writing. It's about a pursuit of something. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sure, it's a calling in a sense, right? Like it's There's something that's
sounds pretty grand.
well, there's something that draws you to it that's more than just kind of the act itself. And I think that's the mark of something that is worth pursuing if you feel that way about it. And I think it's worth pursuing it and with metrics, as we were just saying, with metrics other than just the financial, as much as you can. Here's a question for you on my end. I want to ask you. So let's hypothetically, and I certainly hope this isn't the case, but like, or when you get to that 3-year mark for your own personal pursuit, what is going to be where's the tipping point? Like how are you gonna measure that? Is it like, I'd just be curious to hear.
Sure. I mean, the fact of the matter is it needs to be financially viable. So there'll be several routes. If I can't make an income to live fully off of writing, I'm going to have to do something different. It just doesn't make sense to me to be in my mid-30s by then and to be sort of scraping by. And I don't want to be struggling financially, I guess is the point. I don't have a lavish lifestyle. I'm calling you from Mexico right now. So I'm interested in Spanish. I like the history of the culture, and I wanted to get away from Boston winter. Sure. But a big motivation was also reducing costs, right? And so part of me really enjoys this aspect, but I don't know if I would want to do that out of necessity going forward, So the short answer is it would have to be an income that's livable. Because if I do want to have a family, there's other considerations. In that scenario, let's say I'm not making a livable wage, I'd get another job and write on the nights and weekends, like you were talking about. And I do waver on this too. Like I think you need to be realistic, and I think you also need to be a little bit unrealistic to think that you can make it as well. So that's something that I kind of, I walk that line and I try to think about both sides of it, I guess.
I think you're always, not you specifically, but just you sort of like the broad, I think you're always walking that line, unless you're one of the rare writers that happens to sign $1 million book deal or whatever. Like, I think it's just, you're always going to be grappling with that question, because even if you get to 3 years and you're making a living as a writer, you're only going to be making a living per se in that 3-year mark, and it could very well, like a couple months after that, the contracts don't come in, and then you're not making a living, and or the flip side, you're not making a living 3 months, but then it's like a gambler mindset, right? Like the next pull on the slot machine could be the one that wins. Writing is such a weird craft that maybe if you're at that 3-year point and you're not able to make a living, that could be the sort of foundational ingredients for a really compelling writing piece, right?
You're a writer through and through. Always thinking of
that could be the one that sort of gets you to the next stage, okay. Right? Like a 3-year dream unrealized, and then you write about it, and then all of a sudden you're back on the horse. It's just, I don't know. Writing's weird, but wonderfully weird.
So you're an optimist. I can tell.
I try to be an optimist.
Well, to your point, so I don't want to just talk about the finances, because you're measuring it by other aspects as well. And I don't want to just say that it's just going to be the money at the end of 3 years, right? Like, I want to become the best writer that I can be. I don't think I'm going to be a world changer or what have you. But if I can see progress in my writing, if I can tell compelling stories that hopefully help inspire other people, that's another way to look at it. And I guess I'm curious, like, how are you evaluating it? Because you have really intriguing short fiction. You have a clear love for history. You've written 3 books. So I guess, like, what's driving you? What are the metrics that you're evaluating?
Compelling stories, certainly. I mean, I would argue that's like first and foremost, right? Like the writer should go. You should pursue the stories that you find interesting. To that point, you should pursue the people who have stories that you right. Like, but also I like to change up the genre that I'm writing in, and I think some of that comes just because I like the idea of being well-rounded at any pursuit that you do, and I think in the case of writing, that means being able to adapt and write fiction when you're like some of the writers that I admire most are writers that have written multiple different in multiple different genres, right? They've written some fiction, they've written nonfiction. One of the authors that I really like, and a writer, he's not a one of the literary icons or anything like that, but there's a writer named Andrew Altschul. Andrew Foster Altschul is his name, and he made a big impression on me when I was, like we were talking about before, when I was in college and graduate school. He went to I think he went to UC Irvine, the MFA program there, and then he was a Stanford Stegner fellow. But he's written in fiction. He's published novels. He's published a lot of nonfiction, political nonfiction, and travel nonfiction. And he's just a wildly eclectic writer. And there are a number of other writers as well. I always thought that that's kind of the avenue that I want to take. Is I want to just continue to try and be as good as I can be in every genre. And that also helps then when you're kind of sick of one, you can move on to another one. And so I think that's one of the ways, back to your question, that's one of the ways that helps me kind of gauge progress and success is if I feel satisfied having written something in one genre, then I can go on to the next challenge in a different genre. And so that's another kind of metric. And there are a lot of different genres. So there's the gauntlet is sort of out there for forever because there's always some other type of writing that you could try to pursue.
I'm gonna pivot slightly and go back to like the 5-minute mark of this conversation.
Yeah.
Because you said that I love writing and you knew you loved writing. But you didn't also say you loved climbing. So I'm curious like when you got into climbing, and so what's your relationship with climbing? Because obviously it's a big part of what you do now.
And it's interesting because pursuing writing, as we were talking about in college, that parallels my introduction to climbing. I think I climbed once as a kid at like a summer camp when I was like 10 years old. I think we rappelled or something down from a cliff, and I loved it. But going back to growing up in Indiana, there aren't mountains, so I didn't grow up climbing. I mean, I would climb trees and I would climb. I was one of those kids, and I think a lot of climbers have this where they just kind of climb anything and everything as kids. And I was certainly that. I was the type of kid who was definitely scaring my parents because they would look out the window and I'd be like way high up in the tree. But it wasn't until the very beginning of my freshman year at college, if you want kind of like the full story.
Sure.
I was dating a girl, and we went to the same college, and then we were the very first week of my freshman year, she and I were kind of looking for just something that we could do on a regular basis, weekly basis or whatever together. And where I went to school, the rec center had just built I think like 5 or 6 years before, they'd completed this climbing wall inside the rec center that was pretty state of the art at the time. And even today I think about it and I think it was pretty cool by architectural climbing standards. It was the base of the wall, you tie in at the base, and the wall went up through the second floor of the rec center.
Okay.
So
Neat.
And the second floor, if I remember correctly, had like a indoor track. And so you would be climbing, and if you reached the elevation of the second floor, you'd be on the wall and you could like look over your shoulder and there'd be people jogging around the track like at eye level, basically.
Oh, cool.
Really,
Neat.
really weird, really cool design. I was hooked immediately, just like love at first sight or whatever you want. Love at first plastic feel, And then I remember, so that was the first week of freshman year, probably, I don't know, like late August or September or something. And then my birthday is in October. And so for my birthday that year, my girlfriend, she got me like a harness and shoes and a chalk bag. And
wow.
I remember, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, that was probably a lot of money, for her to, it's very generous of her. But so I remember receiving those gifts and I was like, all right, now I'm like really into it because I got
now we're really into a relationship.
That's right. And so that was at the beginning of my time in college, and then college is also the time that I started taking creative writing classes and stuff. And so the trajectories kind of parallel each other. And after that, I just climbing was kind of from that point on. It was always something that I could do no matter where I moved. I could find a gym, and I could find a community and make friends.
So you were doing creative writing, and then your first work, I think, out of NYU was working for a sort of like a culture magazine. When did climbing become like a topic of writing?
It probably became a topic of writing, right around probably like 2011-ish. I'm trying to remember. It's all kind of a blur, but my initial entry into it was, I was reading climbing magazines and following the competition scene and stuff. And then there was a website called Crux Crush that had been started.
It's sad that it went away. It was an amazing resource.
It was an amazing resource. It was just kind of it popped up. It was kind of one of those early, along with like Climbing Narc and a couple others. There were these great websites that were separate from the kind of traditional climbing media. I just really loved what they published. And so I just emailed the people that ran it and said, I love the website. I'd love to write for it. And, I said, I'd love to write specifically about the competition scene because that's kind of what I'm into the most. And they said, they were up for it. So.
2011, you're really ahead of the curve on climbing competition.
Yeah, it's Tyler Norton at Plastic Weekly, and I joke about this, how this was like the Wild West days of like competition competition climbing. This might have even been before they started getting live streamed. You would just see the results and stuff in magazines, but quite different from now. And then after that, I think the next thing that I submitted was, I think I talked to Mike Helt, who owned Climbing Business Journal. Just emailing him out of the blue. Like I've always been a big proponent of just sending emails to people who do things that you're a fan of, and asking if there's any way that you can contribute. Because my whole philosophy has just been, well, the worst that's going to happen is they'll say no, and then it's like, okay, at least I tried, For sure. So that's kind of what I would do when I was first starting out wanting to write about climbing, is I would just pick cool websites. And I think I emailed Eddie at the circuit later on when he was, I don't know if people listening know Eddie Falk, but he had his own magazine. He's the IFSC, kind of the big IFSC photographer, but he actually had his own magazine for a couple issues. So I think I emailed him saying I'd love to write for him or for his magazine. And so it just kind of, you work up until you're at the bigger publications.
When you were looking at comp climbing, were you thinking that, oh, there's an opportunity there, or it's not being written about, or was it just something that you're like, I mean, first, were you into competition climbing yourself, and then was it just an interest for you to write about it from there?
Yeah, it was. I was never a competitor, but I was always interested in the comp scene. That would always be my favorite part of the magazines. Whenever I'd get climbing and rock and ice, like the first thing I would go to in the front section, they'd always have like the competition results of ABS comps and stuff like that. That was what fascinated me the most.
Interesting.
And I just wanted to write about it because that's what I love. That's the part of climbing that I love the most, hands down, is like the competition scene. It's really not close. It's not even close. I realize that in saying this like people cannot comprehend this, but if I had a choice between like going climbing outdoors or like watching an elite level competition like a World Cup or something, I'd choose the competition, all like 100%. I wanted to report on competition climbing the same way that other sports got reported on, with the same sort of reportage and stuff, because it really didn't really have that. And I think so. I think that just the big draw was that I wanted to. If it had been there, I don't know if I would have wanted to do it, right? But it's like they always say, like, write what you want to read or whatever. And so like I was just hungry for competition content, and there really wasn't very much other than the results. And so it was kind of like, well, if I research this, then I can kind of learn these stories and myself, and which is what I would want to read about. So
What did you find in writing about climbing competition that was different from your previous writing skills? Like what did you have to develop or cultivate in order to do that up to your satisfaction?
Well, I think one of the big changes was sports writing, I think in general, and certainly competition climbing, when you start to report on other athletes and you report on the sport itself, that's very different than the type of writing that I had been doing. The type of fiction that I wrote up to that point was like mostly, I really loved first person narratives. So it was like, people watching, I'm sure, I, right? It's like from your point of view. And the first 2 books that I wrote were memoirs, which are also first person. But then when you start writing about the competition scene, nobody cares about the writer. Like they want to know about the competitors.
Why are you inserting yourself into the story right now?
Yeah. And so that was a big change stylistically for me. Although it wasn't really a conscious choice. I think I was just kind of ready, like we said, going back to changing genres and stuff. I was just kind of ready to stop writing first person stuff for a while. It's very easy to fill content if you're writing in first person because you can just kind of like whatever you can think of. But if you're writing in third person or something like that, if you're writing about competitors, you can't just make up your own thoughts. You need to like fill that content with some facts and figures and stuff. So I think there was a little more reportage that went into it in that sense.
Can you talk about writing about athletes and what that process is like? And for you, like when you first meet someone, what is that interaction? How does that go?
I think in a lot of cases, I try to tell them that I'm a fan of their performance. And that's not to say that I realize that there's a degree where a reporter has to be kind of objective. But at the same time, I feel like it's okay to tell them you're that you enjoy watching them or something like that. Because I always just try to think of if I was in that position, if I was an elite level athlete, how would I take it if somebody said to me that they really liked my performance? I'd appreciate it. And so I find that it's okay to just be honest with them about that initially. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just the same thing that you always hear with writers who write about these athletes. It's like at the end of the day that they're normal people, obviously with extraordinary skills, but they have sort of the same fears and frustrations and whatnot in their own life as anybody. And actually, what you find in talking to them is probably as extraordinary as their results are in these competitions or that their performances are, like in a lot of cases, that's like the least interesting part about them, so I just try to, I think that's the real challenge, is to get some of them to open up about stuff beyond the results themselves or beyond the accomplishments themselves, because so much of their career is centered around making the performance and the results kind of the thing. And so that's the real challenge. But obviously, the longer you have to talk to them, the better, because they kind of open up. And it gets tricky because some athletes give you more time than others. Right.
I'm curious if you've seen relationships change with some of the athletes that you've interviewed more so over the years.
It's weird, honestly, to see. I find that a lot of athletes don't follow competition reportage.
Oh, interesting.
Like I've had very, very few have I interviewed for the first time, and they know who I am, frankly. And not that should be necessarily surprising, but I guess I just think it's interesting that I don't think a lot of them follow like what's being talked about in their sport. They don't follow the reportage that's going on about them, which maybe is better, because I guess if I was like a famous athlete too, I don't know if I'd want to like be reading about what people were saying about me. When you're talking about presenting the personality of the athletes and stuff, one of the things I always want to ask is, like, what are some of your hobbies? Like, what do you do outside of climbing that can help me personalize you to the readers? And vast majority it's like they only climb and they only train and that is it. Or at least that's the only way they answer that question.
Sure.
I'm sure some of them do have other hobbies that they're not mentioning.
Well, a lot of them are like really driven individuals and they're in college as well. So it's like school and climbing. Like what else do you have time for?
Right. Yeah, and that's another important point too. But it's just interesting when you're trying to just kind of humanize these people and personalize them.
I just crushed rock.
It's like they're like they'll just say flat out, they're like, and most of them like kind of laugh about it because they realize it's not the norm. They have that self-awareness, but they just say, I really don't do anything except climb and train and compete. I mean, it takes a special person, which is why, and it's like that's why they are the best of the best, of course.
Exactly.
Because they have that. Speaking of being like obsessive, right? Like and like or like the gambling mentality or whatever. Like they have this. They're so focused on just this singular pursuit, to the point that the rest of us, and even them themselves, like I said, when they laugh about it, like it's almost humorous to the point that they only focus on this. But I suppose to them, the glory of success makes it all worth it when it happens.
You got into travel really by going to South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And had you done much travel before that?
No, I had not, and that was part of the allure and part of the drive to do it was because I was relatively speaking, I was older than a lot of my friends had been when they had traveled. They had studied abroad in college and taught English when they were in their early 20s and whatnot. And I just didn't do any of that. I think maybe partly because I went to graduate school and stuff like that. Excuse me. So I was getting to be, I think I was like almost 30, and just loved the idea of long-term travel. Read a lot of, I loved travel writing. And so I was like, man, I've just never really done this. So I'd like to do it. So I had not done it really prior to that. And I think the fact that I had not done it was really a big thing that was pushing me to do it at that time.
Do you still have angst? Because when I was reading about your account of that time, you applied to a Fulbright journalism scholarship, you got it, went to South Korea, but you were like, all my friends are coming back from abroad, they're having kids, they're getting married, and you were seeing this and it sounded like you were feeling quite anxious. So but you went on it anyways, and I guess it seems like your career has kind of continued down that path where it's not traditional, I guess, quote unquote.
That's a weird time, isn't it? Like age 30-ish.
Yeah, totally.
It's just a like.
That's where I'm at right now, and I have the same thing. Like all my friends are married or getting married.
Yeah. It's just strange because when people get married and then when they have kids, maybe to an extent as well, like their life just changes so much compared to yours. If you're not, I mean, marriage is maybe not as big of a deal in that sense as having kids. Like having kids, then the separation is pretty significant because their whole world, understandably and justifiably, becomes in a lot of cases about that kid. And it's like all of a sudden this connection that you had with these people when you felt so close knit and so similar in terms of life, where you were in life and everything, it's just like all of a sudden it's sort of flipped on its head. And in my case, when I was writing about that, it just so happened that most of my friends happened to get married and start having kids right around the same time. Especially in New York City, what happens in a lot of cases, and it certainly was the case with my friends, is that when they started having kids, they left New York City to live, outside the city, or even live, just somewhere else where they would be able to get a little larger space, and they would commute into the city. But so all of a sudden, it's like not only did I feel disconnected with them, on this. I don't know what you'd call it. I don't want to say like spiritual level, but like this in terms of life space, but also just like on a physical, like my friends, they left, like they weren't around physically. So, that's kind of what I was meaning when I was writing about that. And it doesn't really let up. I mean, as you get older, more and more of your friends get married and have kids and stuff. So, that's just kind of when it all at least for me, that's kind of when it all seemed to start when I was right around 28, 29. So.
Well, then you went through I mean, more transition by physically removing yourself. So you went to South Korea. Where did you end up?
Yeah, so I was in Seoul for a year on the Fulbright research grant.
Oh, okay.
The Fulbright research grant, I'll mention it. I try to mention it whenever I can because it's such a great opportunity, and I want people, especially writers, to know about it. But so for the research grant for a Fulbright, what you do is you pitch to the Fulbright Commission a topic, and it can be in any subject, any academic field that you want, whether it's social studies or whether it's writing, journalism, or whether it's medicine, mathematics, anything. You pitch a project and you pitch a country where you want to do the research for that year-long project. And if you're accepted, you get a stipend to pursue that research project in that academic field, and to live in that country if you're choosing for the academic year to do it. So it's a wonderful program that you can pretty much go to almost any country in the world. And so I pitched an idea to research a project in South Korea. So I moved to Seoul for a year. When that academic year was up, I got a job teaching at a college, teaching English English and literature at a college called Jeju National University, which was in Jeju Island, which is this little subtropical island off the southern tip of South Korea. And I was there I thought it would just be a year, and then it ended up being, I was in Jeju for 4 years, so 5 years total in South Korea.
And you wrote a book about that, but did you write what came out of the Fulbright scholarship?
The Fulbright scholarship was, other than stuff that was published online, there was no tangible book that came out about it. My initial proposal was to write a collection of stories, not fictional stories, like real stories of North Korean defectors who had escaped North Korea and were living in South Korea. And so I was going to profile 20 or 30 of them or whatever and compile it into a book. Got a number of them published at various places, but the book just never happened.
Okay. But there was something about what you found on the island that you did write a book about.
I did. Yep. The island. So from the time I was really young, I'd always been interested in Asia in a very broad sense. I was just fascinated by it. Whether China, Japan, South Korea, I was just so interested in it. And along with that, I was really interested in Hawaii. And so there was a number of years when I was a teenager where I wanted to move to Hawaii. That was like what I thought I was going to do. And then at some point, somebody said, hey, there's this island in Asia called Jeju that is the Hawaii of South Korea. And that's like the moniker. And that's actually, it turns out I would learn later that was actually like a tourism slogan that the Jeju Tourism Organization actually like put out there. It wasn't just like this label that other people gave it. But so I immediately was intrigued by that. I was like, I need to know about this place. I need to learn about it. Because it kind of mixes, my interest in South Korea with my interest in like moving to Hawaii. And, which is kind of funny to think that it was like so simplistic back then, but that's what it was. And then the more I researched that island, the more I became captivated by it, because it really does have its own culture and history that's a little different from mainland Korea, particularly because the climate is different. Like I said, it's like subtropical. Since it's an island, it's very it's sort of a sea culture in a way that the rest of South Korea isn't. Maybe certain like Busan and other kind of coastal areas have an element of that, but certainly when you're talking about like Seoul and stuff like that, like it's almost like comparing, you compare like some of the stuff in Florida to like New York or something, right? It's just like it's like the sea is such an inseparable part of the area that it plays a part into the culture and stuff. So. And I recommend going if anybody's reading this. Jeju's it's an incredible place, and I don't have enough good things to say about it. It's just a fascinating. It's just one of those like fascinating places in the global palette, like just a fascinating place to travel. There are like you can sort of reference it compared to other places. Like, oh yeah, it's kind of like how Seoul does this, and it's kind of like there's a backpacker culture, kind of like how Thailand has a backpacker. But it's like, it's all those things interwoven, and it's also kind of its own thing.
Well, even though you can't disclose some of the major the major brands and magazines and publications and whatnot that are contacting you, I imagine there's going to be quite a bit of travel in your future for the Olympics. At least, I mean, at the very least, going to Japan, I imagine.
I'd like to. I don't currently, to be honest, I don't have any. I don't have any. Like, I don't want to say I don't have any plans to go, but I'm not scheduled to go for any certain media outlet. And and to get like press accreditation, you have to go on behalf of a media outlet, you know. And since I'm freelancing for all these different places, like it would just be a matter of them reaching out to me and saying, hey, would you go to the Olympics for us? It hasn't happened yet.
So magazines, if you're watching,
yeah, right.
Which would, one, be awesome,
yeah.
But two, you should get this man to Tokyo.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like a lot of people have been asking me that if I'm going to Tokyo, and it's like, yeah, I would love to, you know, absolutely, of course. But yeah, nothing's in the works at the moment. Which is fine, you know. That's like whatever. Like, it's fun to cover it no matter what. So
he says demurely.
No, I mean that sincerely. I was talking about this to somebody on I think it was on Twitter. We were messaging about it, and I was just saying, like, Tokyo, going to the Olympics would be a cool culmination of all the work that I've done, but it's not gonna make or break, you know, me feeling like it's been an awesome ride to cover it up to this point. So
you want to go?
To be honest, I've toyed with the idea of just like buying a ticket and like basically showing up and being like, I'm here, like put me to work. But of course I want to go. I mean, I think anybody that follows competition climbing would be, you know, I would imagine anybody wants to go. So yeah.
I just like the idea of making it happen. I mean, I'm not so into comp climbing, so.
Well, I think that there could be a cool. Almost like renegade Gonzo type of story, like for that, like just like, hey, I'm just gonna go to the Olympics and sort of like snoop around, and try to, you know, see what happens. I mean, that's how the best travel stories happen anyway, right? It's just like, let's see what happens.
Exactly. I reviewed my list of questions. Those are all I have for you. So thank you very much for adhering to the schedule.
Sure. We didn't get into the transcendent travel moments, but
there were so many questions on that list that we didn't get to.
That's all right, man. This is fun. I'm really excited about what you're doing. So.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you chatting and your honesty and sharing more about your career and your life. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Aaron.
Is there anything that the audience or the listeners can do to help you out, or anything that you have coming out that you want people to know about?
Let's see. A couple things. I have if people want to get in touch with me for whatever reason, I have a website, johnburgman.net. I'm on Instagram as well. I'm on Twitter. And I have a book coming out next month called High Drama that is the history of American competition climbing. So if people have been listening to this and they're stoked about the comp scene, they can pick that up. It's you can get it on Amazon. It'll also be in audiobook form. It'll be on Audible. There'll be an ebook download or just, you know, paperback and stuff like that. So maybe we could put the link for the Amazon link or something in the description.
Exactly. Are you taking pre-orders now, or?
Yeah, people can pre-order. There will probably be. I'm talking with the publisher right now about doing a little kind of mini book tour around the country, but that hasn't been firmed up yet. So I don't know where I might go, but it would either be bookstores or maybe some climbing gyms or stuff like that. But yeah, can be pre-ordered.
Stay tuned, and we'll have the link down below. All right, thanks again, John.